He was born in a one-room log cabin with a dirt floor and no windows. A humble beginning for a man who would one day hold the very soul of a nation in his hands. This is the story of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, a man who rose from poverty to the highest office in the land and guided his country through its darkest, most divided hour. So, how did this self-taught, lanky frontiersman from Kentucky become one of the most revered figures in American history? It wasn't an easy path. Lincoln's early life was marked by hardship and loss. His family moved several times, and he lost his mother when he was just 9 years old. Formal schooling was a luxury he rarely had, receiving maybe a year of it in total. But what he lacked in formal education, he more than made up for with an insatiable hunger for knowledge. He would walk for miles just to borrow a book. He read everything he could get his hands on, teaching himself law, grammar, and literature, often by the dim light of a fireplace. This self-reliance and determination became the bedrock of his character. He worked various jobs: a postmaster, a shopkeeper, a surveyor, and famously, a rail splitter. His lanky frame and surprising strength became legendary, but it was his honesty and sharp wit that truly made him stand out. People called him Honest Abe, a nickname that stuck with him for life. Lincoln's political career began in the Illinois state legislature. It was here he began to hone his skills as an orator and a debater. He had a unique way with words, simple, powerful, and deeply resonant. He spoke from the heart, and people listened. He served one term in the U.S. House of Representatives, but his real national prominence came in 1858 during a series of now-famous debates against Stephen Douglas for a U.S. Senate seat. The central issue of these debates was slavery. The nation was a tinderbox, deeply divided over whether this institution should be allowed to expand into new Western territories. Lincoln, though he lost the Senate race, articulated a powerful moral argument against the extension of slavery. He famously declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free." These words echoed across the country, positioning him as a leading voice of the newly formed Republican Party. Just 2 years later, in 1860, the impossible happened. This log cabin lawyer, with his plain-spoken wisdom, was elected President of the United States. But his victory was the final spark that ignited the flames of secession. Before he even took office, 7 Southern states had seceded from the Union, forming the Confederacy. They saw Lincoln's election as a direct threat to their way of life, built on the foundation of slavery. On March 4, 1861, Lincoln delivered his first inaugural address. His tone was one of reconciliation, not confrontation. He appealed to the better angels of our nature, pleading with the South to return to the Union. "We are not enemies, but friends," he said. "We must not be enemies," but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Just over a month later, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, and the Civil War began. The next 4 years would test Lincoln's leadership. He was a wartime president. Grappling with a conflict-esque scale was unimaginable. The Union Army suffered devastating defeats in the early years of the war. Casualties mounted at a horrifying rate. Lincoln faced immense pressure, not just from the Confederacy, but from within his own government. He was criticized by generals, cabinet members, and the press. Some called him a tyrant for suspending habeas corpus. Others thought he wasn't aggressive enough in prosecuting the war. Through it all, Lincoln remained steadfast. His primary goal was always the preservation of the Union. He believed that the American experiment in democracy was a beacon of hope for the entire world, and he could not let it fail. He was a masterful political strategist, managing a cabinet services full of his former rivals, whom he famously dubbed his team of rivals. He listened to their counsel, but the final, crushing decisions were his alone. The turning point of the war, and of Lincoln's presidency, came in 1863. On January 1st, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States shall be thenceforward, and forever free. It was a monumental step. It transformed the war from a conflict solely about preserving the Union into a moral crusade for freedom. It also allowed African American men to enlist in the Union Army, and go on to fight with incredible bravery and distinction. Later that year, in November, Lincoln traveled to the site of the war's bloodiest battle, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He was there to dedicate a national cemetery. The main orator censors a 2-hour speech. Lincoln followed with a short address, just 272 words, that he had written on the train. It took him only 2 minutes to deliver, but in those 2 minutes, he redefined the very meaning of the war and the nation itself. He spoke of a new birth of freedom and resolved that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The Gettysburg Address is now considered one of the greatest speeches in human history, a perfect encapsulation of the ideals of democracy and sacrifice. By 1864, the tide of the war had turned in the Union's favor, largely thanks to Lincoln's appointment of Ulysses S. Grant as the commanding general of all Union armies. Grant's relentless strategy began to grind down the Confederate forces. That same year, against the backdrop of a still raging war, Lincoln ran for and won re-election. In his second inaugural address, delivered in March 1865, Lincoln once again showed his profound capacity for grace and magnanimity. With victory's servicio sight, he didn't gloat. Instead, he called for a just and lasting peace, with malice toward none, with charity for all. He urged his countrymen to bind up the nation's wounds and care for the soldiers, widows, and orphans left behind by the conflict. His focus was already on the difficult task of reconstruction and reuniting a fractured country. Just a month later, on April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was over. The Union was saved. For a few brief days, a sense of relief and celebration swept through Washington. But the nation's joy was tragically short-lived. On the evening of April 14th, Good Friday, Abraham and Mary Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater. During the performance, a pro-Confederate actor named John Wilkes Booth slipped into the presidential box and shot the president in the back of the head. Abraham Lincoln died the next morning. The nation was plunged into grief. The man who had carried the country through its greatest trial, who had saved the Union and freed millions, was gone. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is immense. He was a man of deep contradictions, a folksy storyteller, and a brilliant political mind. A president who wielded immense power, but remained deeply humble. A leader who prosecuted a brutal war, but held no malice in his heart. More than anything, he was the president who held a nation together. He guided the United States through its existential crisis, and in doing so, ensured that its founding ideals of liberty and equality would not only endure, but be expanded and reborn. His story is a powerful reminder that from the most humble of beginnings, greatness can emerge, and that one person, armed with principle, courage, and a belief in the better angels of our nature, can truly change the world. Thanks for watching. If you found this story inspiring, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the lives of history's most fascinating figures. See you next time.